Folk believe diagnosis is how medicine helps, that naming the problem is the first step to fixing it. But that's not actually what's happening, because the more we diagnose, the more conditions appear. The definition of normal keeps shrinking. So something else is going on here. And if diagnosis isn't just describing illness, what on earth is it doing? Drugs and Addiction, an Anarchist Perspective, Dickie Dredd. This is part 45, and we're now moving on to chapter 6, Medicine and Misdiagnosis. And I'll summarise that chapter now. So modern medicine didn't just learn to heal, it learned to classify. Over time, the patient became a case, and the diagnosis became the dominant language of care. What looks like science is often structure, charts, labels and categories deciding what counts as normal and what doesn't. As systems like DSM and ICD expanded, more of everyday human experience was pulled into the realm of diagnosis. Sadness becomes depression, distraction becomes deficit, rebellion becomes pathology. The line between illness and difference starts to blur, and the system grows with it. This isn't just about health, it's about control. Diagnosis can help, even save lives, but it can also reduce people to checklists, stripping away context, story, meaning. The more medicine mirrors the factory, efficiency, output and compliance, the further it moves from relationship and understanding. The challenge isn't to reject medicine, but to loosen its grip, to use diagnosis as a tool, not a truth, because real healing doesn't come from labels, it comes from lived experience, connection and reclaiming the story behind the symptoms. So, chapter 6, Medicine and Misdiagnosis, part 47, The Medical Machine, Diagnosis and Doctrine. Modern medicine did not simply arise to heal, it evolved to classify. The hospital became both factory and courtroom, a place where suffering could be observed, labelled and processed. The patient was transformed from person to case, from participant in recovery to subject of an institutional ritual. What began as a humanitarian project slowly ossified into doctrine. The conviction that disease is deviation and restoration means conformity. The great invention of the 19th century wasn't the germ theory or the scalpel, but the graph, the chart that divided normal from abnormal, healthy from sick, as Foucault argued in The Birth of the Clinic. The new medical gaze didn't just describe bodies, it produced them as objects of power. To be seen was to be known, and to be known was to be controlled. Diagnosis replaced dialogue, illness became inscription, symptoms translated into data, lives into ledgers. Excuse me. This logic reached its bureaucratic peak in the psychiatric manuals of the 20th century, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and the International Classification of Diseases. Each revision multiplied disorders, extending the empire of pathology. Sadness became depression, distraction became deficit, rebellion became conduct problem. The boundaries of illness grew to match the reach of the market. As Saz warns, the so-called myth of mental illness was less about truth than jurisdiction. Who gets to decide what counts as normal? The industrial metaphor wasn't accidental. The same civilization that measured labour by productivity measured health by functionality. To recover meant to return to work. Medicine copied the factory floor, efficiency, supervision, output. The bed became the workstation, the ward the assembly line. Rose called this the politics of life itself, the management of vitality as a branch of governance. Health ceased to be a condition and became an obligation. Excuse me. The moral tone of diagnosis reinforced the hierarchy. Doctors inherited the authority once held by priests. Their vocabulary promised absolution, but also carried the risk of condemnation. Receiving a diagnosis was a kind of faith ritual, an act of submission to a system claiming to know you better than you know yourself. Naming illness became an exorcism, casting the story out of the patient's hands. What could not be measured was quietly dismissed as noise. The system thrived on precision and obedience, yet its confidence rested on simplification. Each chart and checklist assumed the human could be understood through symptoms detached from context. The body became a mechanism, the mind malfunction, the soul superstition. Reduction brought control but cost compassion. Anarchist thought offers an uncomfortable mirror. Political hierarchy claims to protect freedom while eroding it. Medical hierarchy does the same for health. Both depend on consent disguised as necessity. The patient, like the citizen, is told obedience equals safety. Yet, as with all centralised power, meaning seeps away from the centre. Healing cannot be decreed, it must be lived. To dismantle the medical machine is not to abandon science, but to reopen conversation. Diagnosis can still serve, even save, when held lightly, as description rather than destiny. And when it hardens to doctrine, it reproduces what Section 43 called the tyranny of scale, the worship of numbers over nuance. The task now is to recover medicine's lost language of relationship, to turn case files back into stories and statistics back into solidarity. So diagnosis was never just about understanding people. It became a way of defining them, quietly controlling what counts as normal. Which means the system isn't just treating illness, it's shaping behaviour to fit itself. So if being healthy means being functional inside the system, what happens to anyone who isn't? And if that's the case, is the problem the patient or the system itself? Next up in Chapter 6, Medicine and Misdiagnosis, we got Section 48, Psychiatry's Empire, from Asylum to Algorithm.